Human voices rang out in harmony, drowning out the screams and weapons fire, as dropships plummeted through the atmosphere into the chaotic fray. "This is it, boys," Charles Wright yelled over comms, bracing as the shuttle touched down on the planet's scorched surface. He was a battle-hardened warrior, a grizzled Terran Defense Force veteran on the front lines of humanity's desperate struggle against the Krenim Empire. Above, the TDF frigate Dauntless unleashed broadside after broadside against the alien fleet. The Outer Rim colony burned under orbital bombardment as humanity made its final stand. The dropship ramp lowered, disgorging Wright and the battle-hungry Marines of Vulture Squad onto the hellish battlefield. Krenim warriors swarmed the colony's outskirts, locked in brutal combat with the battered human defenders. With a song on their lips and rifles in their hands, Vulture Squad waded into the melee. Bullets and plasma bolts crisscrossed the killing fields, gore splattered and bones shattered. And through it all, human voices rose in fierce, boisterous songs of war. Wright led an impetus charge, firing from the hip and roaring out the lyrics to an ancient battle hymn passed down through generations of Terran warriors. His Marines took up the melody. Some sang, some hummed, others screamed and bellowed with raw throats. All fought like demons against the Krenim hordes. The aliens faltered at the strange sight and sounds, their resolve shaken by the humans' unbreakable spirit. Suddenly a klaxon wailed, emergency lights flashed, and Charles jerked awake in his bunk aboard the Dauntless, the fading chorus of the battle dream still ringing in his ears. Captain Zhang's sharp voice crackled over the comm systems. "All hands, report to battle stations. Unknown ship detected boarding crews to the launch bay. This is not a drill. Say again, this is not a drill." Grunting, Wright rolled out of his bunk and donned his battle gear. The dream of that fateful battle always haunted him, like a portent of something terrible to come. He knew deep in his bones that humanity wasn't done clashing with Krenim, not by a long shot, and he had a gut feeling as he stalked towards the launch bay to lead the Marines once again that the fight was about to begin anew. The Krenim had to be stopped here, in the void, before they could threaten human colonies. Or billions more would burn under alien guns and perish unless Wright and the Dauntless ended the threat today, once and for all, no matter the cost. The Dauntless brig was cold and cramped, hardly befitting the sleek warship's proud reputation. But it would have to do for Juno, Wright mused, as he watched the captive being escorted into a cell by a pair of grim-faced Marines. With Juno secured, Wright made his way to the bridge where Captain Zhang waited, poring over a data pad with a furrowed brow. "What have we got, Captain?" Wright asked, leaning against a bulkhead. Zhang sighed, tapping the pad. "Not much. We pulled the logs from Juno's ship, but they're empty, wiped clean." "Convenient," Wright scoffed. "Too convenient." "Agreed, but there's something else." Zhang pulled up a file, a waveform of some sort. The ship's black box picked up an unusual transmission just before the engines failed. "Listen." He hit play, and a series of discordant, eerie tones filled the bridge. Almost musical but jarringly alien, the sounds wormed into Wright's ears, raising the hairs on the back of his neck. Zhang stopped the playback, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" Wright asked, unsettled. "I've got our best people working on it, but so far inconclusive." Zhang tapped his fingers on the console pensively. "There's something about it, Wright. Something wrong." Suddenly the ship-wide comm crackled to life, and a voice that sent chills down Wright's spine echoed through the Dauntless. Juno, humming the same unsettling melody from his cell in the brig. Wright and Zhang exchanged a look of growing unease. In the weapons bay, Marines shifted on their feet, hands tightening on rifles as a strange anxiety crept over them. The humming seemed to permeate the very bones of the ship, a siren song of impending doom. On the bridge, a young ensign's voice wavered as he called out, "Captain, I'm picking up multiple warp signatures on long-range scanners. They're closing fast." Zhang straightened, a coiled spring of tension. "Sound battle stations, Wright. Get your men ready for potential boarding." Wright nodded curtly and strode from the bridge as klaxons began to blare and crew scrambled to their posts. He found his squad waiting in the armory, gearing up with quick, efficient motions born of years of training and combat. But something was off. Several of his usually unflappable Marines seemed distracted, anxious. They fumbled magazines, flinched at shadows. The eerie humming had gotten to them, it seemed. The ship shuddered violently, throwing men and equipment against the bulkheads. Alarms screamed as the Dauntless rocked under a sudden, vicious barrage. The attacking ships had dropped out of warp with no warning, no demands, only violence. In the chaos deep in the brig, Juno's cell door slid open with a soft hiss. Inexplicably unlocked, almost as if the ship itself wanted him free. Juno rose smoothly, unhurriedly, and stepped out into the smoke-filled corridor. Still humming that unnerving alien tune, an almost serene smile on his face, he strode forward as the Dauntless groaned and lurched under the brutal assault, deeper into the wounded ship's heart, toward some unknowable but terribly certain purpose. As the Dauntless shuddered under the Creenham assault, Charles led Vulture Squad through smoke-choked corridors to the primary airlock. Boarders had breached the outer hatch, the sharp hiss of plasma torches filling the air as they worked to cut through the inner door. The Marines took up positions, rifles trained on the slowly weakening metal. Sweat beaded on Charles's brow, his finger hovering over the trigger. With a shriek of tortured metal, the inner airlock door gave way and Creenham warriors poured through, plasma rifles blazing. Vulture Squad opened fire, the tight confines erupting into a storm of bullets and energy bolts. Charles dropped 2 aliens with precise shots, then dove for cover as return fire sizzled past his head. But something was wrong. Several Marines were reacting sluggishly, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Charles watched in disbelief as Private Jenkins took a plasma bolt to the chest, standing motionless and unresponsive, even as the superheated gas burned through his armor. And then he heard it. Beneath the din of battle, a voice was humming that same eerie alien melody. Charles's blood ran cold as Juno strode calmly through the airlock, cybernetic implants glinting in the strobing emergency lights. The entranced Marines turned as one, raising their weapons, and pointed them at their squadmates. "Snap out of it!" Charles roared, barely managing to knock aside a rifle barrel before it could spit a burst of rounds into Corporal Hicks's back. He slammed the butt of his own gun into the controlled Marine's helmet, sending the man crumpling to the deck. The remaining Creenham pressed their advantage, forcing Vulture Squad to fall back. Charles dragged Jenkins' limp form, shouting for a medic. They retreated through the corridors, the sound of pursuit close behind. And all around them, that damnable humming continued, seeming to come from the very walls of the ship itself. Charles's unease grew with every step, a sense of wrongness pervading the Dauntless like a physical presence. On the bridge, Captain Zhang fought to restore order amidst the chaos. Damage reports flooded in, shield status, weapons, life support, all critical systems flickering on the edge of failure. He barked orders, the crew scrambling to obey. Suddenly, Ensign Davis at the helm began to hum, his hands moving over the controls as if in a trance. The Dauntless lurched drunkenly, thrusters firing erratically. "Davis, what the hell are you doing?" Zhang demanded, gripping the arms of his command chair as the ship shuddered. But Davis didn't respond, his eyes glazed and distant. On the view screen, one of the Creenham warships grew larger and larger. They were on a collision course. Zhang drew his sidearm, the pistol heavy in his hand. "Davis, stand down, that's an order." The ensign kept humming, kept steering them towards certain doom. Zhang clenched his jaw, aimed and fired. The single shot echoed like a thunderclap. Davis slumped over the controls, a neat hole in his temple. Holstering his gun with a shaking hand, Zhang leapt to the helm console and wrenched the ship into a sharp turn, the hull groaning under the strain. Reports flooded the bridge, panicked voices overlapping, crewmen turning on each other in engineering, a fire raging in the hangar bay, sick bay overflowing with wounded. The Dauntless was tearing itself apart from within. In the corridors, Charles and the remnants of Vulture Squad fought their way towards the brig, driven by a horrible realization. It was Juno. It had to be. Whatever the Creenham had done to him, whatever foul technology they'd implanted, He was the source of the signal, the one controlling the crew. But the way forward was blocked by a knot of crewmen, their eyes blank, humming that awful alien tune. Charles hesitated, unwilling to gun down his own people. Desperation welled up inside him, a lifetime of battlefield instinct screaming to act. He holstered his rifle, took a deep breath, and began to sing. The old cadence was rough and off-key, his voice cracking with strain, but it was loud, defiant. To his shock, the Marines beside him took up the tune, half-remembered words from a boot camp drill a lifetime ago, and the entranced crewmen faltered, some blinking rapidly as if waking from a deep sleep. Charles sang louder, motioning his people forward. The controlled crewmen parted like a wave, some even joining in the impromptu choir, their voices a ragged but powerful counterpoint to the alien transmission. With newfound determination, Vulture Squad pressed on, the battle hymn rising over the wail of alarms and the distant thunder of the Krenim guns. The Dauntless shook around them, but Charles kept singing, kept leading his people deeper into the wounded ship. Towards Juno, towards answers, towards a chance, however slim, to end this nightmare before it could consume them all. Charles and his ragtag choir battled through the corridors, their voices a bulwark against the insidious humming that threatened to consume the Dauntless. Marines and crewmen alike joined the desperate chorus, shaking off the alien influence with each verse. They pushed forward step by hard-fought step towards the brig and the source of the signal. On the bridge, Zhang's fingers flew across the comm console, broadcasting a frantic distress call to any TDF ships in range. "This is the TDF Dauntless, requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by Krenim forces, utilizing an unknown mind control weapon. Repeat, we are—" The message cut off as a conduit exploded overhead, showering the captain in sparks. Undaunted, he continued, his voice hoarse with urgency. Charles's squad reached the brig, their battle hymn echoing through the smoke-filled halls. Juno stood before them, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. The discordant tones intensified, a physical pressure bearing down on the humans' minds. Charles felt his vision blur, his thoughts unraveling at the edges. Some of his companions staggered, succumbing to the signal's siren call. But Charles refused to yield. He drew in a deep breath, reached deep into his memories, and began to sing. The words were ancient, a battle hymn passed down through centuries of human warfare. He poured everything into the song, his pain, his rage, his desperate, unrelenting will to fight. One by one his squad joined in, their voices ragged but defiant. Juno recoiled as if struck, his cybernetic implants sparking and smoking. The controlled crew members collapsed like puppets with cut strings, the signal's hold broken. Charles advanced, still singing, his eyes locked on the aliens. For a moment, they stood face to face, the battle hymn ringing through the brig. Then Juno turned and fled, vanishing into the ship's labyrinthine depths. Before Charles could give chase, the Dauntless shuddered violently, throwing him against a bulkhead. The Krenim ships, sensing the weakening resistance, had redoubled their assault. Consoles burst in showers of sparks and debris, emergency lights flickering as the barrage tore through the ship's failing shields. Gritting his teeth, Charles rallied his exhausted squad and began the long, perilous trek to the bridge. Bulkheads groaned and the deck bucked beneath their feet, but still they sang, a fragile lifeline of hope amidst the chaos. As they climbed through a tangle of ruptured conduits and sparking wires, the Marine beside Charles took a hit, his armor shattering under a plasma bolt. Charles caught him as he fell, never missing a beat of the song. He slung the wounded man's arm over his shoulders and pressed on, his voice growing hoarse, his lungs burning. Ahead the bridge hatch loomed, dented and scorched. Charles staggered towards it, his squad close behind, their voices fading to a ragged whisper. The battle was far from over, and the Dauntless groaned and quaked around them like a wounded beast. But they had bought time, precious seconds with their defiance. Now it fell to Zhang and the battered bridge crew to hold the line, to pray that the distress call had been heard. Charles' hand closed on the hatch wheel, a flicker of desperate hope kindling in his chest. The battle hymn rose one last time, a fading ember against the encroaching dark. Charles and his battered squad staggered onto the bridge, their faces grim and exhausted. The battle hymn faded from their lips as they took in the scene of controlled chaos. Consoles sparked and smoked, the lights flickered erratically, and the deck shuddered beneath their feet as the Krenim barrage battered the Dauntless's failing shields. Captain Zhang turned from the tactical display, his face etched with strain. "Report," he barked, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "Juno escaped, sir," Charles said, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "And he's not the only problem. Those ships out there, they're tearing us apart." Zhang nodded gravely. "Our shields are at 20% and falling fast. Weapons are barely functioning and we've lost main propulsion." He met Charles' gaze, his eyes haunted. "I sent out a distress call, but no response. We're on our own." Charles felt a cold weight settle in his gut. The Dauntless was a tough ship, but she couldn't take much more of this punishment, and with Juno still out there, still controlling the crew. Suddenly an idea sparked in his mind, born of desperation and a grim understanding of their dwindling options. "Sir, we need to destroy Juno's ship. It's the only way to stop the signal." Zhang frowned, considering. "We can barely keep ourselves together, right? How do you propose we take out another ship?" Charles stepped forward, his jaw set. "I'll lead a boarding party. We've got one shuttle left in the hangar bay. We can use it to get aboard Juno's ship, fight our way to the bridge, and plant charges." "A suicide mission," Zhang said softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Maybe," Charles allowed, "but it's the only chance we've got. If we don't stop that signal, we're all dead anyway." For a long moment, Zhang was silent, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. Then slowly he reached out and clasped Charles' hand in a firm grip. "Do it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Take whatever you need. And Charles, good luck." Charles nodded, returning the grip with equal strength. "Thank you, sir. We won't let you down." He turned to his squad, seeing the determination in their eyes, the readiness to follow him into hell itself. "Grab your gear and meet me in the hangar bay in 5. We've got a ship to catch." As they filed out, Charles paused at the threshold, looking back at Zhang. The captain stood tall and proud amidst the ruins of his bridge, a man prepared to go down with his ship if necessary. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then Charles was gone, racing through the shuddering corridors of the Dauntless towards an uncertain fate. The hangar bay was a mess of twisted metal and flickering fires, but the shuttle stood intact amidst the chaos. Charles and his Marines piled inside, strapping in as the engines roared to life. Over the comms, Zhang's voice crackled. "Godspeed, Vulture Squad. Give 'em hell." Charles thumbed the mic. "Roger that, sir. We'll be back before you know it." Then to the pilot, "Punch it." The shuttle leapt forward, bursting from the hangar and into the maelstrom of the battle raging outside. Plasma bolts and missiles crisscrossed the void, the Krenim ships looming like predators amidst the darkness. Charles felt his heart pounding in his chest as they wove through the chaos, the pilot's hands flying over the controls. "There!" he shouted, pointing to Juno's ship. "Get us in close." The shuttle dove towards the alien vessel, its hull pitted and scarred from the Dauntless' defiant fire. They careened into the hangar bay, the impact throwing them against their restraints. Charles was out of his seat before the engines had fully spooled down, his rifle in his hands. "Move out!" They charged down the ramp, into the eerie, pulsing light of the Krenim ship. Alarms blared and shadows danced on the bulkheads, but there was no sign of resistance. Charles felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. Where was Juno? Where were the guards, the defenders? As if in answer, a horribly familiar sound began to echo through the corridors, the discordant, grating hum of the mind control signal. Charles felt it worming into his ears, his thoughts, insidious and relentless. He shook his head, gritting his teeth. "Block it out!" he shouted to his squad. "Focus on the mission!" And then, almost instinctively, he began to sing. The battle hymn rose in his throat, ragged and defiant, a shield against the alien influence. His Marines joined in, their voices merging into a raw, powerful chorus. They advanced through the ship, rifles at the ready, the song never faltering. Krenim crewmen boiled out of side passages, their eyes blank, humming in eerie unison. Charles and his squad cut them down, the close confines of the corridors running red with blood. Still, they pushed forward, the song rising above the screams and weapons fire. At last they reached the bridge, the doors sealed tight. Charles slapped a breaching charge against the metal, his finger hovering over the detonator. He looked to his Marines, seeing the grim resolve in their eyes, the knowledge that this was the end, one way or another. He hit the detonator. The world exploded in a flash of light and a roar of sound. Smoke poured through the shattered doors and Charles charged through, rifle blazing. His squad followed, their voices rising in a final defiant chorus. And there, amidst the chaos and the carnage, stood Juno. The alien looked haggard, drained, his cybernetic implants sparking and sputtering, but his eyes burned with a fierce, unyielding hatred as he stared at Charles. "You!" he snarled, his voice thin and reedy. "You've ruined everything." Charles leveled his rifle at Juno's head, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It's over, Juno. Surrender now." But Juno only laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Oh, it's not over, human, not by a long shot." His hand flew to a control panel, his fingers dancing over the keys. Suddenly alarms began to blare, a strident warning klaxon that set Charles's teeth on edge. "Reactor core meltdown initiated," a calm, synthetic voice announced. "All personnel, evacuate immediately." Charles's eyes widened in horror. "What have you done?" Juno grinned, a death shed's rictus. "If I can't have this ship, then neither can you. In 3 minutes this vessel will be nothing more than atoms scattered across the void." For a moment, Charles was frozen, his mind reeling. Then, with a snarl of rage, he lunged forward, slamming the butt of his rifle into Juno's face. The alien crumpled, his laughter abruptly cut off. "Move!" Charles roared to his squad. "Back to the shuttle, double time!" They ran, their boots pounding on the deck, the warning klaxon chasing them through the corridors. Juno's mocking laughter seemed to echo in their ears, a promise of impending doom. They burst into the hangar bay, leaping into the shuttle even as the engines roared to life. The pilot punched the throttle, and the tiny craft shot out of the bay like a bullet from a gun. Behind them, Juno's ship shuddered and convulsed, its hull beginning to glow with an eerie, pulsing light. They were 100 meters away when the ship exploded. The shockwave slammed into the shuttle like a physical blow, sending it tumbling end over end. Charles clung to his seat, his teeth rattling in his skull as the pilot fought to regain control. Debris pelted the hull, the scream of tortured metal filling the cabin. And then, abruptly, it was over. The shuttle righted itself, the Dauntless looming ahead, battered but unbroken. The Krenim ships were gone, vanished into hyperspace, their purpose thwarted. Charles slumped back in his seat, his heart hammering in his chest. They had done it. Against all odds they had stopped Juno, stopped the Krenim, but the cost... He looked around the shuttle at the empty seats, the blood-stained deck. So many good men and women lost, so much sacrifice, so much pain. The shuttle glided into the Dauntless's hangar bay, settling to the deck with a weary groan. Charles stood, his legs shaky, and made his way to the ramp. Zhang was waiting for him, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. "Right," he said softly, his eyes saying what his words could not. "Is it—" Charles nodded, sudden tears burning in his eyes. "It's done, sir. Juno's gone. The Krenim, they ran." Zhang closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God." But Charles couldn't find it in himself to thank anyone or anything. Not now, not with the weight of the dead pressing down on his soul. He looked out at the Dauntless, at the scorch marks and torn metal, the scars of a battle that had almost been lost. 2/3 of the crew gone. The ship itself crippled, barely able to limp back to the nearest starbase. It was a victory, yes, but one that tasted of ashes and blood. Zhang seemed to sense his thoughts, his hand coming to rest on Charles's shoulder. "You did what you had to do," he said quietly. What we all had to do. The Krenim would have slaughtered billions if they'd broken us here. You saved lives today, Charles. Never forget that. Charles nodded, swallowing past the lump in his throat. I know, sir, I wish the price hadn't been so high. So do I, Zhang murmured. So do I. They stood there in silence, watching as the dauntless engines flared to life, the great ship turning ponderously towards open space, towards home and an uncertain future. Charles looked out at the stars, at the infinite void that had claimed so many lives this day. The battle was over, but the war stretched endlessly ahead, a yawning abyss waiting to swallow them all. He began to hum, low and mournful, an echo of the battle hymn that had carried them through the fire and the blood. One by one the crew joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of grief and resolve. They sang for the fallen, for the ones who would never see home again. They sang for the dauntless, for the scars she bore, and the spirit that refused to yield. And they sang for themselves, for the long road ahead and the battles yet to come. In that moment, as the stars wheeled overhead, and the song filled the battered halls of the Dauntless, Charles felt a flicker of something deep in his chest. Not hope, not exactly, but a grim, unyielding determination. They were bloodied but unbroken. They were wounded but not defeated. And as long as a single human voice could still raise in song, as long as a single human heart still beat, then the fight would go on, to whatever end. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.